Hi, I'm Adam Natali, Director of SVA Theater at the School of Visual Arts. If you've never heard of SVA, we're a preeminent art and design college in New York City. Check the description below for more info. Since 2014, SVA Theater has hosted After School Special, the college's annual alumni film and animation festival. The festival is normally a series of free screenings followed by Q&As with alumni who are successfully working in the film industry. Even though we're unable to host in-person screenings this year, we're thrilled to be able to present interviews with over 25 alumni who've worked on a wide variety of feature films, television shows, documentaries, animated films, and more. Whether tonight's Q&A focuses on a particular series, film, or other work, we'll be sure to note it in the description below and will provide info on how to watch. All of our festival interviews will premiere here on YouTube during the week of September 21st. We're calling this our work from home edition of After School Special, and our guests are zooming in from all over the world, from Singapore and Germany to Canada and California. A full schedule of After School Special 2020 interviews can be found at svatheater.com, but all videos will remain on YouTube following their premieres. I hope you enjoyed tonight's interview, and if you're interested in viewing past After School Special Q&As, you can visit the School of Visual Arts' YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in, and fingers crossed, we hope to see you in person at an SVA Theater event in the near future. I'd like to welcome Joel Sevilla, a 1999 graduate of SVA's BFA Computer Art program. Joel is actually a returning After School Special guest, having participated in year one of the festival when he joined us in 2014 for a screening of the original Avengers film, so we're thrilled to have him back. For the last 20 years, Joel has navigated a constantly shifting industry by embracing the diversity of his SVA education. Beginning his career as a freelance animator in New York, Joel kept busy with web design to help fund his much-needed snowboarding jaunts. From there, he went to California, where I assume maybe the snowboarding might be better in some regions, to create visual effects for dozens of feature films and commercials with hydraulics, where he was a CG supervisor. He is now the owner of his own visual effects studio, Track VFX, which has offices in both Los Angeles and Vancouver. Besides the Avengers, he's worked on a long list of films and shows, including Looper, Jack Reacher, X-Men Days of Future Past, San Andreas, and Stranger Things, which scored him an Emmy nomination. Most recently, he served as a visual effects supervisor on Greyhound, starring Tom Hanks, which premiered in July on Apple TV+, and which we'll be discussing tonight. So let's welcome Joel. Hey, how are you?
All right, good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good to see you again. Glad to have you back, returning from year one all the way back in 2014. A lot's changed since then. You got your own studio now, which is awesome to hear. But I'd love to start by having you tell everyone a little bit about your experience while at SVA and how you decided to go into visual effects.
Sure, yeah, definitely. So my SVA career, from high school, I had always been into drawing and painting and any kind of art stuff. And so I ended up having the opportunity to have a computer art class in my high school. So that kind of led me to look around when I was looking for schools, like who had the best computer lab at that point back in '95. So there weren't a ton, but SVA definitely had the best. And so that was a lot of the reason that I chose SVA, and being in New York as well was a huge thing for me. So so I started, and my major originally started as like advertising design kind of stuff. And I switched it as soon as I started doing more computer lab stuff at SVA. I fell in love with computer animation, and it just went from there. And I was really into any kind of animation at that point. I had taken classes doing stop motion animation, and I was a huge, and still am a huge fan of like there's an old stop motion animation called Vincent by Tim Burton that was a huge kind of influence for me getting into animation, and I think that kind of led me further down the animation rabbit hole and finding out the CG animation stuff that I could make and make it look like stop motion, and it just went from there. So I really focused on learning everything I could about computer animation. And you have to learn everything at that point. It was like I was learning everything at the same time. I think my junior year was when Maya first came out. We had an instructor who was a beta tester for Maya at SVA. So we were like right on the edge of that when it came out. So which was really cool. So yeah, just going and learning as much as I could. And, I was very involved in school as well through the computer lab. I worked part-time at the computer lab. And then I was also an RA in the dorm when the George Washington was still a dorm. I'm not sure if
it's a hotel now, a very
okay.
nice hotel.
So, yeah. So I was an RA there. So like my I really feel like I got as much as I could out of my SVA experience. I was so determined to take everything I could and get everything out of it and come out of my senior year knowing that I was going to get a job immediately. And at that point, my senior year, I had already done some work. I'd worked on a couple little projects here and there. There was a Red Man, Method Man video called The Goodness that I worked on that year, which is really cool. And then I got an internship at this place called Mechanism Digital, which is still around to this day. And I worked on a couple different things there, but that was actually my first movie credit. I worked on a Spike Lee movie starring Savion Glover. And I did some animation of this little guy in that movie.
I assume that's Bamboozled.
Bamboozled. That is Bamboozled. Yeah, that was my first movie credit. Yeah, so I was kind of had a bit of a head start, I think, before I graduated, and that had everything to do with the contacts I'd made at school. And for sure, John McIntosh, who was the head of the department at that time, I feel like we make jokes all the time, like I should pay him a percentage of every paycheck that I get. And it's true. He was so instrumental in my career as a CG artist. He helped so much, was so willing to do whatever he could for all the students, but he and I kind of formed a really strong bond, and yeah, it was amazing to have that support going through school, and it just led to so many more good things after that. So yeah, that was my experience at school.
And your thesis film, won an award the year that you graduated. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my thesis film, it was called Eden, and I won a Dusty Award for it that year, the year that I graduated. A few years back, I was looking for a copy of the film, I knew it was somewhere on beta tape, because that's what we used back then. I couldn't find it anywhere, but I ended up doing a very deep dive search on the internet and ended up finding it. And I found this really low res version of it that I was able to see, and oh yeah, wow, I did that. That was so long ago. But that was really exciting. And I think you know, being from start to finish working on that project, and um, again, like being so focused on the animation of it. Like look at it now, and it's very obvious what I liked about CG at that point and what I didn't really care about.
Mhm.
um, really didn't care for modeling and that sort of thing, and it kind of shows. But I really did love the animation, and I spent so much time like really nailing that as much as I could. So yeah, it was pretty cool to see that after I dug around for it.
So you mentioned after graduation, you pretty much went right to work in the industry. Like you said, you worked on Bamboozled, you worked on that video, you started as an animator. Can you sort of give us the overall arc of your career over the past 20 years since
Sure.
graduation?
Yeah, yeah. So again, at the time I had an instructor, his name was Jason Strugo, who was my thesis advisor and also a softamage teacher at SVA at the time. And he was working at Nickelodeon Digital, um, and that year that I graduated. And so it was kind of, I believe it was maybe 2 weeks prior to me graduating. He kind of pulled me aside and said, hey, you know, after seeing what you've been doing this whole time, and you know, wanting to help, there's some positions opening for animators at Nick Digital. Would you be interested? And I was like, hell yeah, that's awesome. And I had a couple of friends that worked. One worked there already, who was also a graduate of SVA, Josh Cordes. So I knew he was there, and then one of my good friends and still very close friends, Jeremy Butler, was graduated with me. So we all ended up working at Nick Digital after we graduated, which was awesome. So it was kind of like an extension of school, but right into the real world, and did a lot of cool stuff. Worked on a bunch of commercials and music videos and that sort of thing. And then after a few years in New York at Nick, I started freelancing and bouncing around different houses, or Curious Pictures and RGA and PSYOP, a few different places in New York. And but I was still kind of drawn to doing some film stuff. So again, Joshua Cordes, he was kind of the trailblazer. He had answered a random ad for animators, that they were looking for animators at this place in Santa Monica, California. So he left Nick, went there to work for like a month or two, and then came back. And I remember he came back and was like, man, it's so awesome. Like being out there and the work is so great. So he left, and, you know, him being one of my best friends, I kept in touch, and he's like, you got to come out here. And I ended up, you know, I think it was a year and a half later, I ended up moving to LA, working at Hydraulics where Joshua worked. And then from there, it was just all the cool stuff that I figured I'd worked on some cool stuff at that point. But it started being like TV shows. I remember X-Files was like a cool show at that point, and I did a shot for X-Files. And then I also had the opportunity to work on a Tool music video, which in high school I was like #1 fan of Tool. Like I
That's
couldn't
awesome.
I couldn't imagine. I was like, is this real? Am I like really doing this? I'm working on a music video for this band that I idolize. So that was amazing. And there's more, I have more story about that later, but uh, yeah, and it was just like the projects kept getting bigger and cooler. And, you know, the people I was working with were so talented, and, you know, such a good environment to jump in and get that experience that early on. At that point, I was 25, 26. And you know, my career was going. Um, and I still love it. You know, like, I started as an animator. I'm doing different things now, but I still love doing animation. I still love the whole process, the visual effects, all of it. It's still exciting to me, and you know, it's been a very fun career.
And that's great to hear. And what's interesting is, you know, we've interviewed quite a few visual effects artists for this year's After School Special. Many of them work in invisible effects.
Mhm.
They're not on the big blockbuster films like you are, the Avengers, like I said, Looper, Stranger Things. Um, you know, I assume that at some point you did or have done invisible effects, but
Yeah.
these big blockbuster films, I mean, is it just as exciting to work on them as it seems it would be for a visual effects artist?
It is. It really is. I mean, I think what's really cool is I think when people ask me about work or what I do, and kind of start explaining it, and then I'm like, oh yeah, so you know, there's like the movie, you know, Avengers. Have you seen it? And of course, like a lot of people have seen an Avengers movie, so they kind of get it, you know what I'm talking about, and for to have them understand it in a way and possibly have seen work that I've done, people that I've never met before, and they're familiar with something that I did, whether they knew it at the time or not, they can go back and say like, oh yeah, I saw that, and wow, what part did you work on? And oh, that's so cool. And that feeling of like, even when I go now to go see a movie after it's done, and sit and watch and understand like how long it took to do what we did, because the stuff takes a long time. So it
Sure.
might pass by on film in a couple of seconds, something that we worked months and months on for. But it's still very exciting and exhilarating to watch it, and to know that I was a part of it in some way, and that it's on film. Like it's always going to be there. And you know, I can eventually show my kids like, hey, this is what dad worked on, and that kind of thing. So that's really a huge part of it. It's fun.
So besides that Tool music video, was there one piece, you know, that really stands out that you absolutely loved working on?
Ooh, so I think there's two big ones, um, and then there's the Tool one. But um, um, so when we worked on the first Avengers movie, um, because at that point I was, you know, a huge fan of comic books, and knew at that point like Iron Man had come out, so there was like this momentum building for Marvel, and um, and knowing how cool Avengers was gonna be, so just being a part of that was super cool. The stuff that we did in it, you know, it wasn't the most fun animation that I've done, but I'd say probably one of the best experiences, and definitely one of the most exciting, just because of the scope of like at that point in my career, what that meant to work on that movie, and how excited I was to work on it, and like, and then everything was very secretive, so it was kind of cool. Like, you know, I'm working on this cool thing. I can't talk about it though. Um, so that was super cool. I would say kind of hand in hand is Stranger Things. When you know, at that time I was working in hydraulics, and I was a visual effects supervisor. At that point, I had moved up from being an animator to CG supervisor to VFX supervisor. So when Netflix approached hydraulics, and at that point I was very involved in that at the management level of like when projects started coming in, we did like kind of a dog and pony show of like, you know, this is what we can do. This is the stuff we've done. We did a tour of the studio with some people from Netflix. And the whole time I was like so jazzed about working on Stranger Things season 2, because I just finished watching season 1, loved it. And the and the stuff that we were going to be doing in season 2 was like all the cool creature animation stuff that, you know, as an animator is like super, that's like the highest pinnacle, like cool creatures to animate. So I remember that day we showed them around, and I think it was like 2 days later we got the call that we got the job. And it was a ton of work, and it was grueling at points. And the team I was working with were just amazing. Like everybody at hydraulics was awesome. We really pulled together and made some really cool stuff. And uh, and even the filmmakers were great. The Duffers were super nice and easy to work with. The vision that they have for stuff is amazing. Paul and Christina Groff, who were the Netflix side VFX supervisor and producer, were challenging. You know, they challenged all the vendors to do their best work, and it shows. I think we did some really great stuff. The Emmy nomination for that was just kind of like icing on the cake. I mean, at that point, when I heard that we were nominated for it, I kind of like didn't understand that it was a big deal. I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's cool. And as I was, you know, like I remember telling my sister not too long after, I was like, oh yeah, so you know that show I was working on, I got nominated. You know, I'm like, my name is on the thing. And she was like, really? That's amazing. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. And then like it started hitting me later how you know, how much of an honor it was, you know. And it's such a group effort. I wish everybody could have been named on the nomination. There's so many people involved, and it's such a big crew that deserves all the credit. But yeah, it was great. And being in that same category, you know, we didn't win. I mean, you know, there's this show called Game of Thrones that people like, which was amazing. Like I voted for Game of Thrones that you know, I would have over anything else. But yeah, just to be mentioned in that category with those guys, and to have worked on something that so many people have seen, again, is like one of those things that, you know, people ask, you know, a few years ago, oh, what have you worked on recently? I was like, oh, there's this Netflix show called Stranger Things. I was like, oh my God, of course. You know, like people are like, what do you mean? So that's fun. I think that's really exciting. So those are like you know, some of the highlights of, you know, the stuff that I've worked on so far, for sure.
Well, we actually have a reel from hydraulics
Cool.
of Stranger Things, so I'd like to throw that up right now and have you talk a little bit about you know, the work that you did on the show.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, we did quite a lot of work and on this show, and it ranged from doing these. What you're seeing here is the upside down kind of world effects, and you know, it's really challenging. A lot of this stuff, none of this is in camera. All of these vines and all that stuff, they did a little bit here and there in camera, but you know, we did a lot of R&D and making sure things were looking great. And the directors and Paul, the VFX supervisor for Netflix, was very particular about how all this stuff should look. And you know, it was really collaborative. Like they kind of let us run with a lot of the look of how this ended up. So it was really cool. And then now this stuff is just super fun. I mean, who doesn't love a little creature, cute little guy to animate who's actually like a monster and eating people? But that was fun stuff. I mean, it looks cool. It's a cool concept. And, you know, doing creature animation like this is something that I've always loved to do. I obviously didn't animate all of this stuff. I did some cherry picked things, but The team of animators that we had at Hydraulics were just amazing. So it was awesome to be like kind of heading up that department. And especially, like I said, coming from such an affinity for animation and creatures and stuff, like this is always cool stuff anytime you get to do aliens or that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a really fun project, and I would say some of the most challenging. Like we had to figure out some stuff that like just we hadn't done up to that point, and especially with the shadow, that monster there, just like this there, as it was described at first, it was like, we want this creature, it's kind of like this big nightmarish spider looking thing that's made out of a tornado of ash, and we're like, okay, sounds easy, sure. So there's a lot of back and forth, but I think what we came up with worked really well.
And so as a visual effects supervisor, you just mentioned that you did still work on some of it. Is that typical for a supervisor to create as well?
I hope so. I think it's really important as I went through my career, going from an animator to start like animation supervisor and then CG supervisor and VFX supervisor, and now having my own company. I always liked to be involved on a granular way in some of the shots, and being able to animate stuff, especially. And what's interesting about me in particular is that usually a VFX supervisor would come from more of a 2D background, doing compositing and that sort of thing, where my background was more 3D. So, it's interesting in that way. And I still really like getting into it and like doing animation when I can. And if there's shots that come up that, I have time for in between all the other stuff I have to do, I'll be like, yeah, everybody can work on everything else, and I want that one. I'll take it. So I think it's not typical. I know it's a very intense job being a VFX supervisor. There's so many different things that you have to kind of account for, and so many different people and departments and things. So it's a lot to manage, but I've been lucky to be able to set aside some time to actually dig in and do some animation.
And so you were a supervisor on Greyhound, which, as I mentioned, premiered in July on Apple TV Plus. This is very different. It's not the monster movie, but it's still very visual effects heavy. It's a World War II movie, ships in the ocean, and it's pretty much a ship battle for an hour and a half. There's not much else to it. It's still a fun movie and very interesting. It's about something that happened specifically during the Second World War. But talk to us a little bit about how you signed on to that project.
Yeah, so we, again, it was kind of a very similar thing. Playtone, which is Tom Hanks's production company, we had a relationship with somebody there, and we had a meeting with Aaron Schneider, who is the director of Greyhound, and we talked about his vision for what this was going to be, and his idea of how he was going to carry it out. And at that point, we knew there was going to be a lot of previs. We were going to have to figure out the ship, where the ships were going to be in the battle, the timing of things, and it was a huge kind of puzzle to put together. So along with doing water effects and all that stuff is just a whole other thing. So, but the previs in particular is what I focused on for this film. So we set up like a mini studio at the production company. Had animators there, had camera trackers, and just like a kind of like mini previs hit team that did everything, that did all of the animation of the boats, the battles, and then we used a virtual studio, which I know is gaining quite a lot of press lately, doing virtual production. So we were able to bring the previs that we did from Maya into Unreal, and use kind of a game engine to have the director be able to set up shots and use kind of real time, and we had the animation of the ship battle was kind of running, and he was able to like be on the ship and pick a shot, or we'd noticed that a ship needed to be in a different place in order for it to be featured in a shot that we wanted it to be. So doing it that way was really kind of innovative at that time. I mean, this is a couple years ago. I know it's kind of like just when virtual production had been like kind of taken off. So it was cool to be a part of it in that way and be on the cutting edge of that virtual kind of way of doing previs.
And just for people who might not be visual effects savvy, previs is pre-visualization, you know, before all of the visual effects are actually plugged in. And Maya, which you mentioned earlier, is a type of software. And then Unreal is, correct me if I'm wrong, Epic Games created a platform, Epic Games being the company behind Fortnite, created a platform that many people are using for many different things, for you know, creative software. So is that, it sounds like that must be gaining traction then, using Unreal.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends that are doing virtual production on a lot of different things, and it's so nice to be able to see that stuff real time when they're filming it. So I know a lot of people have probably heard about Mandalorian and the way that was made, and there was a lot of virtual production, and the way that they did it was different than what we did, because they were using animation not only for the previs, they were using it as backdrop for what they were shooting. So that was really cool, and it's just getting more and more advanced. All this stuff is helping kind of bring filmmaking to a place where you can get more real-time feedback as you're making a film. You know, it's so important, I think, for when you're shooting something that that the actors kind of know what's going on. A lot of what I do, what I've done on being a visual effects supervisor, is I kind of, you know, if an actor is sitting on a green screen and they don't know what's going on in the background, it's hard for them to kind of sometimes imagine like what's happening. So, you know, I'll sit down with them and say like, okay, here's what's happening. And I can actually show them what is going to be in the background and where it will be. And then in some cases, we're able to take that and put it on a screen that they can see like real-time composite of themselves in front of this thing. And it really helps get the actors into the mindset of what's happening. And it helps the director and the DP kind of set up shots. So it's such a good tool. And I think it's just going to continue to get better and make filmmaking more accessible to everybody and quicker and better overall. I mean, I think, you know, I don't want to poo-poo on too much stuff, but if you imagine a movie like the Revenge of the Sith, right? That was mostly done on a green screen. And if you go back and watch that today, you kind of can see that that was mostly done on a green screen. And in some cases, they didn't really, you know, get the actors didn't kind of really feel what was going on. But nowadays, it's so seamless. And I think that has so much to do with there being more information to give the filmmakers as they're making the film. which makes the visual effects better in the end.
And so you just mentioned, sometimes you're working with the actors. Is that happening more and more where you're actually going to set and are working on the shoots?
Yeah, for sure. As a visual effects supervisor, more and more. I mean, it started, I think my first like official VFX job, I worked on a commercial that we shot in Chicago, and it was like dealing with a few actors, commercial actors, and then all the way to, I was the production side visual effects supervisor for Baywatch. So I'm like sitting down with Dwayne Johnson and kind of talking over like, hey, this is what this boat's going to be on fire behind you. Like, this is what's happening. And he's like, cool, man, cool. So yeah, that's exciting. I mean, it's cool to be a part of it on that level and to be, kind of in the room with these folks as they're making these movies. It's exciting.
So back to Greyhound, you said it, this has been in process for several years, even though it just came out a month or so ago. With respect to what we saw in the trailer, even though we don't have a reel of the specific visual effects, you said you did mostly previs, but there was other work as well. Do you recall any particular sequences that you worked on? I mean, it's a lot of boats bombing each other, but was there one sequence that you recall?
Yeah, for sure. So there was the shot where you see the torpedo kind of just skipping along the side of the boat, of the ship. That little sequence right there where I don't want to ruin the film for people, but a torpedo is launched at the ship, and there's the whole sequence of the torpedo barreling down at the ship. So we had to figure out the timing, and there was a particular shot that when Tom Hanks is kind of walking on the bridge of the boat looking at the torpedo headed toward them, and we shot that. Obviously we were on a soundstage. We had this big kind of set piece of the bridge of the boat, and it was on a hydraulic device that was able to turn and move. So we had to figure out how to make the camera move and the set piece, the hydraulic boat, move in a way that was going to be believable to the rest of what we had to do to make the ship be in the water, and all this crazy stuff that you got to figure out. So that little sequence, it took a lot of time to get the cameras right and get the angles right. But what really made that work was that we had done so much previs prior to the shoot. So we were able to get the camera right where it needed to be. We were able to get Tom Hanks right where he needed to be as the torpedo was, the CG torpedo that wasn't there at that point was barreling by. So I think that one in particular was really fun, and kind of like a puzzle piece to figure out.
We can see it again.
Yeah, there you go.
This is it right there. It's I don't know if it was the climax of the film, but it's definitely climactic, if nothing else.
Yeah,
it's a really intense scene, and I do specifically remember the ship tilting at that moment. So that's really interesting of what exactly you were doing, and you were working with the camera as well. As I mentioned, this isn't a monster or superhero movie, and I know that you mentioned that those are more of your favorite films. Did you like working on a more realistic film as opposed to the monsters and aliens?
Yeah, I think every project has its own challenges, and it kind of like is a fresh new thing to kind of solve. So this was another one of those things, is knowing what the movie was going to be, knowing Tom Hanks is going to be in it, that's all exciting. And knowing that it was going to look the way it did, because Aaron Schneider, again, the director, had such a clear vision for what he wanted it to look like from the onset. So I just knew it was going to be like this very cool, epic kind of ship battle thing. And knowing that it just was, it's exciting no matter what, and um, so yeah, being a part of that, and the stuff that the aliens and all that stuff, the kind of like imaginative things that aren't really there is fun. But the realism stuff, the stuff that you shouldn't even know is there, is also really fun, because it's like, if you can kind of trick the viewer into believing what's happening on screen is what's happening, then that's job well done. And knowing that that stuff really did look great. A lot of scenes, it's so hard to do water and that sort of thing. And the guys that did the finishing on the project were amazing. So it was really cool to see that all done.
Yeah, and it's a really cool film, so I encourage people to check it out.
Yeah.
So I mentioned a few years ago you started your own studio, Track VFX. Can you tell us a little bit about how you founded it and what you've been working on there?
Sure. Yeah. So one of my good friends, Jared Avalos, and I, both working at Hydraulics a couple years ago, we had kind of talked here and there about doing our own thing. Jared is one of the most brilliant camera tracking guys that I've ever met. And us working together at Hydraulics, since I was the VFX supervisor, he was one of my kind of lieutenant supervisors. And so yeah, we kind of thought a lot about, there's a bit of a gap in the way some visual effects are being done in the last few years. And we came up with this idea: what if we had a tracking company that just does camera tracking and match moving to start out with, and was made that available to other VFX houses. A lot of VFX houses are outsourcing work, whether it be camera tracking or rotoscoping, in some cases compositing, and a lot of that stuff goes overseas here and there. But we felt like there was an opportunity for us to do something that we do really well and make it more accessible, having studios in Los Angeles and Vancouver, and be competitive with these other companies that have been doing this for a while already. So yeah, we started just almost 2 years ago now, and it's been great. We grew very quickly. We started out in an office. It was just 5 people, and we quickly outgrew that office and knocked out a wall to make the room bigger, double the size. And then shortly after that, we were like, we have to move again. And we moved into a bigger studio that could house about up to 30 people now. So, with, obviously the COVID stuff that's been happening the last few months, we were lucky to have a lot of work in the queue already. So we were busy for several months after, things started shutting down. And then we saw a little bit of a decline, in June, started getting slow, and we just focused on training and getting, if we didn't have real work to work on, we were making projects for artists and kind of really focusing on learning and getting better. So now, as of now, 3 weeks ago, it's been going bananas. We're super busy, and it seems like things are kind of people are shooting now again, and we're getting back into it. So it's been good. So it's been a really good experience. And I've always kind of had a entrepreneurially kind of savviness. I've had other businesses besides doing the visual effects. I've owned some real estate here and there, and I owned a gym for a while, and I kind of have always had this other side businesses going on. So to have this visual effects kind of house and doing this kind of work and seeing where it can lead now, we're starting to do more previs. We've been kind of doing it here and there, but that's starting to come up more, and there's just a lot of different branches we can go from here. So it's exciting being a part of that and growing the business and having something to continue to grow.
And I know I'm thrilled that you're working during the pandemic, and I know that you've been bouncing around. Right now, you're in New Jersey, but
Yeah.
you were at the Vancouver offices right before that. Are people working in the offices at your studio? Are they working from home? Can you tell us about any specific projects
Yeah.
that they're working on, if it's not
Yeah, for
confidential?
sure. So when it was March, that third week of March when things were kind of shutting down, and we started our studio based in AWS cloud. So we were already working kind of up in the cloud virtual machines. So we made a decision for everybody to start working from home that week, and it was really seamless. Other than getting used to, the first couple of weeks was like using Slack to communicate and a lot of Google Meets stuff and screen sharing and that sort of thing. But we kind of were set up already to have people work from home, which was not that it turned out to be a genius thing when who knew that this was going to happen. But at the time, we were just thinking, we don't know how quickly we're going to grow. So what if we had a system where we can just turn on a machine when we needed it? We're paying for storage and all that stuff as we need. And there was a very little cost up front for getting a studio started, other than buying desks and monitors and that sort of thing. So in that regard, it was really fortunate how we were ready for it. And as the months progressed, we got better at doing meetings. And, so every day I have a meeting at 11 o'clock with the entire team. No matter where I am in the world. I was in New York yesterday. The day before that, I was in Vancouver. I'm in New Jersey right now, but I had my meeting at 11 a.m. It was 2 o'clock here today, but so it's we've managed to figure out how to make it work and work really efficiency. And my partner and I have talked about how in some ways having to be thrown into this new way of communication has helped our communication overall for that we didn't know that we needed. I think people learned a way to keep everybody informed in a way that wasn't happening before. So I think when we do end up going back to the studio, we're going to just be stronger for it, for what we learned during this time. So, it was difficult for sure, like up front. And I feel like I'm on a phone or on a Zoom call, like pretty much all day, every day. But the good thing is it's been working. And I feel like this whole thing it's going to be great to be able to go back to a studio and be with the artists. And, for me personally, I really love being able to talk to somebody face to face and be in front of their monitor, and, you can go over things. But, this is the next best thing. And I think that going forward, it's kind of changed the paradigm for how visual effects is being done. And a lot of studios that had never considered having people work remotely are now forced into it and figured out how to do it. And I think now going forward, that maybe they're thinking, hey, this isn't so bad. We can make this work. And like, I have a friend that lives in Vancouver and is working for a company in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't have been able to do that before. And it's such a cool opportunity for that person, and at such a cool place to work in New Zealand that probably everybody knows what I'm talking about. that they wouldn't have been able to do because of their family and their life in Vancouver. Um, so, I think it's changed. It's been challenging for sure, but I think there's going to be some good changes that come about because of it. Um, and we're excited. I think, like, for me, I know when we do start having people come back to the office, it'll be like maybe some people come in Monday, Tuesday, and the rest of everybody comes in Wednesday, Thursday, and then everybody works from home on Friday. It really makes, there's so much more options and so many more options for talent. I can now be okay with hiring somebody that lives in New York or Ontario or Florida. If they're really good, then the challenge of getting them to wherever we are, isn't a problem anymore. They don't have to be uprooted from where they're living, and they can come and work and work on cool stuff. So, um,
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. As you're hiring new talent, and I'm glad you frame yourself as an entrepreneur. You're a person of color. As now a leader of your own studio, are you striving to ensure diversity and inclusivity amongst your staff and those you hire?
yeah, for sure. Jared, my partner, is half Mexican. I'm Dominican and Puerto Rican. So, coming from that place where, we're Latinos and in a place where, there wasn't a lot of diversity in the beginning. In both regards, I think, over the years, I remember it was like very few people that looked like me doing this stuff, and very few women, for sure. So over the years, it's been so nice to see that change. And I think there definitely could be so much more diversity. I think there's been a lot of really great steps in having women get into visual effects. It was very much like back when I started, it just seemed like boys' club. Um, so that's changed dramatically. And I think some of the best artists that I know are women that are doing this stuff, which is really awesome. So um, yeah, Jared and I have made it a point when, especially with things that have been going on in the States and the movement and the protests, and we took our team aside and just talked about everything that was going on, and talked about diversity and how, like, what are people thinking? How are they feeling about this stuff? And we are kind of blessed in where we are. We have a very diverse crew already. Like I said, Jared and I are brown. We got we have a couple Koreans on the team. We have a guy from Mexico, and there's a good amount of diversity, and I'm excited to continue, growing the team and growing the diversity. And I think there's so much to gain from having different people learning from one another in that way. And it just is the inclusivity of it, I think, should continue. And I see it that way. And we're getting now a lot of resumes and that sort of thing. People have been reaching out for work, so it's nice to see and see people from all over the world inquiring about getting jobs and stuff. So that's cool.
And so, any advice to offer students or folks who are looking to break into this field?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me when I was getting started was I had a very real hustle going. Like I was so focused on and concentrated on getting what I wanted to get done and doing what I really like to do. So I knew I wanted to do animation. I was like, I'm going to do this however I can. And the other big thing for me at that point was I found a buddy to like help drive. You know, we were kind of like feeding off each other. And so Jeremy Butler, who I mentioned before, he and I were like kind of attached at the hip. Like we if people mentioned either of us, it was like as a team. If you don't say Jeremy without Joel, and vice versa. So
And
uh,
Jeremy did the Avengers
yeah,
panel with us back in
yeah, yeah,
2014. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, you know, having that support and having somebody that was so like-minded, and that we were kind of very focused on, you know, gaining momentum and doing something in this industry was huge for us. So that was a huge thing. One of the things I wish I kind of knew more about in the beginning was kind of the business of art and visual effects and that sort of thing, like kind of you know, setting up a company the proper way and getting uh, you know, making sure that like just the normal stuff that you wouldn't think about as an artist, um, that you would get that set up and get it moving. And you know, I was telling John at one point, John McIntosh, I was like, there should be like a business course, I think, that people should kind of get into at school, that would help them kind of know what's coming. And like even taxes, you know, like that was something that, you know, nobody ever really I hadn't learned on my own, and to a point. And then I started like, oh, this is something I should figure out. I have a business as a freelance artist. This is something I have to figure out. So I think getting that knowledge and getting just getting organized in a way, as a as thinking of yourself as a freelance artist as a business, and knowing that, you know, there's a professionalism that I think people really appreciate, having a resume, and making sure that, you know, it's it's done professionally, and that you're conducting yourself in a way that you know, makes you a good hire. I think that was something that that I really focused on when I was coming out of school. And then now, as somebody that is doing the hiring, um, I kind of have a very keen eye for things, or like things that I'm really looking for, and I can see, which helps me kind of determine like who's going to be a good hire. Um, and so I'd say that's a good thing to focus on, and get that stuff all straight.
So what's the next project of yours that we should keep an eye out for? Are you able to tell us what's coming out next?
Um, so we're working on like a bunch of different things right now. We're working on a lot of commercials. I think now that things are shooting, it's starting out with a bunch of commercials. So we've done a bunch of Lexus commercials, especially. I think Lexus is like really jumping out of the gate. We are going to be doing some stuff for a Warner Brothers TV show called The Flash. So that'll be cool. We just finished a Netflix show called Ted Lasso. So that was kept us real busy the last few months during the early times of COVID. And what else? Yeah, there's a lot. It's exciting. There's so many different things happening right now, and there's a lot. It's great because there's so many different outlets. I mean, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, HBO, and then all the films that are going to hopefully start shooting again soon. So it's a really good time, I think, to be in this industry. There was like a little bit of a lull that happened back about, you know, 8 years ago, that things kind of slowed down and things were changing, shifting. But the paradigm, I think, of entertainment has shifted, and there's just way more opportunity to work on stuff and cool stuff. I mean, all these studios are have hits, hit TV shows, and hopefully as people are finishing up school and getting into their careers, they'll have an opportunity to work on some of this cool stuff.
Well, I'm so thrilled that your success has grown even further than it did the last time we were together for After School Special. I'm so excited to hear about your studio. Again, it's Track VFX if anyone's interested in applying for
Sure.
a job there. And thank you for being here again. It was great catching up, and great to see your work on screen as always. So everyone, check out Greyhound on Apple TV Plus, and if you want to find all of Joel's credits, it's on his IMDb page. It's a very long list of a lot of cool projects. So thank you so much for being here, Joel, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Have a good night.
All right, thanks, Adam.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this Q&A and hope you'll check out our other After School Special videos on the School of Visual Arts' YouTube channel. Thank you for your interest in and support of SVA and its alumni, and for your support of the arts in general. Stay safe, stay healthy, and be well.